And I am so excited to start this series. This is Linux for the real world, and it's going to be a user-directed series. I'll explain what that means in a second, but first of all, I want to talk about why we're doing this series. First of all, Linux is hot, and so are Linux system administrators, or at least that's what I tell myself. But really, when I say hot, I mean jobs right now in the tech industry are much more plentiful and much more available if you have Linux experience. I could give you statistics, but I'm not a statistics guy. I just got to tell you that Linux is a great skill to be able to put on your resume and be able to talk about in an interview. So Linux is hot right now, and this series is going to just make you that much better at managing Linux and using Linux. Now this stems from my last two series, the LPIC 101 and 102 certification series, and I really loved those series. Oddly enough, some of my favorite moments during those two series were when I veered off of the exam objectives and gave a little insight on real-world applications. And again, that's where this series was born. This entire series is going to be like a virtual internship because experience is priceless. You know, certifications here at CBT Nuggets, obviously we love certifications. It's a great way to show that you know what you're talking about. But if you're interviewing, nothing beats experience. And that's what we hope to do. We hope to give you a chance to get some real-world Linux experience virtually right here in this video series. It's pretty exciting. And you are the key. I'm going to circle this underlined you. You are the key to this series because when we say user-directed, that means that you are going to be telling me what it is you want to learn more about. See, I've been a Linux and Unix system administrator for about 17 years. I just had to re-add that in my head because, man, it seems like I'm getting old. But I've had a number of interns over the years, and invariably the concepts I think are going to be super hard, they tend to get really easy. And some of the things that I think are easy peasy tend to be really difficult to grasp. So you're going to help me design this virtual internship. So here's what I think it's going to look like when we go through this series. I'm going to start out, well, I call this an intern nuggets because it's a little bit different than normal. It's the real world series. But basically, our first nugget, which we're going to go through right now, is going to be on Linux installation. I figured installation, it's a good place to start, right, at the very beginning. And it's something that you probably haven't thought a lot about. You think installation, just grab the CD, pop it in and go. But there's a lot we can learn in real world situations about installation. Now, how I'm going to work these nuggets, this one I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, and then we'll move through them quickly in the remaining videos in the series. But I want to make sure everybody is covered. So I want to make sure a beginner can come in to any nugget and get something valuable out of the nugget without being lost. So, for example, we're going to start this nugget with how to do network installs. It's a great tool. It's a great thing that you do in the real world. It means you have a freshly updated install. We'll talk about why that's awesome in a few minutes. And then I'm going to move into an intermediate level type scenario. Still talking about Linux installation. That the whole nugget's going to be about Linux installation. But an intermediate type thing might be setting up a local mirror, because when we do a network install, you're going to find out if you install off the internet, it's really slow. So what we're going to do is then move on to something like how to set up local mirrors so that your network installs go much quicker and more efficiently, and you can do multiple installs. Then I also want to move on to an advanced level thing. Let's say this is already stuff that you know about or you're comfortable with that. Well, I want to go to the advanced level stuff about Linux installation, and I want to talk about kickstart files. Kickstart files, again, we're going to talk about in just a little bit here, but kickstart files are a way that you can automate the entire installation process. It can still be a network install off a local mirror, but it's a great way to automate multiple installs or even just one install, but generally they're used if you have a bunch of similar installs to do. So what I want to do is every time that we approach a topic in this series, I want to make sure that there's something for everyone. I don't want beginners to feel that they're left out, and at the same time, I don't want advanced users to think they've wasted their time. So that's what we're going to do. And here is the dirty little secret that you don't ever have to tell anybody. It'll just be, our secret. A lot of times, even if you're an advanced user, we're going to cover some things that maybe you didn't even realize. Maybe you didn't realize how cool network installs were. I don't judge. I'm just here to show you some real world experience, and you can learn stuff from the beginner and the intermediate level. And beginners, if you're worried that the nuggets aren't going to be valuable for you, don't worry, because as we go through the process, you're going to become advanced users. That's the whole goal. So I think this is going to be a great way to approach the series, and we're going to start out right now going over Linux installation stuff. So let's look at how to do a network install as opposed to just popping in a CD. So the first thing we have to do is get the actual install images designed for network installs. Now there's a couple advantages here I'm going to show you. Throughout this series, my plan is to focus on two different operating systems. We're going to focus on Ubuntu and CentOS. Now, CentOS is the open source version of the very popular commercial distribution that we won't mention, but the RPM-based distribution, and we're just going to use CentOS because it's free, it's open source, you can download it and use it in your environment. And the other one that's very, very common is Ubuntu. So we're going to search for the installation media for both. So Ubuntu minimal CD is the first thing we're going to search for, and you'll get this nice little search result right here. There we go. And so now we are on the installation minimum CD page. Now again, this is something that you'd be able to find eventually from the Ubuntu site. I just think searching is a much quicker way to go about it. So we're going to end up with CDs. Again, installation CDs. I know you're thinking, Sean, I thought this was a network-based install. Well, bear with me for just a minute. What we're going to do is pick which CD we want. Now we're going to go with Ubuntu. It doesn't matter at this point if you want Ubuntu Server, Ubuntu Desktop, Ubuntu or Kubuntu or Xubuntu. This is the minimal CD to get an installation going. All right, you'll notice how big it is. 23 megabytes. Definitely not a real big CD image. And you'll see how it works in just a second. But this is the minimal CD. You either go with a 32-bit or a 64-bit. You're probably going to want a 64-bit version if you're installing it on a big server or a computer that supports 64-bit. I'm using a virtual machine, and it's not a real big beefy virtual machine. I'm actually going to go with a 32-bit ISO image. So click on it. It's going to download it. I'm going to click Save. So it's downloading, and it's actually called mini.iso. That's a little bit confusing because they're all called mini.iso. Kind of a pain. I wish they would have named them more appropriately, because like the 11.10 version or the 11.04 version, they're all named mini.iso. Very, very annoying. Nonetheless, make sure you know where you're saving it so that you can burn it to a CD, and we're gonna use it in a second. Now, while this is downloading, I'm gonna go back to Google. And now we're going to search for CentOS net install. Here we go at the CentOS website. Again, I'm going with the 32-bit version. I'm going to go with CentOS 6.2, the most recent version as of the making of this video. And it's supported until 2020. So we're kind of good there. But again, I'm going to go with the 32-bit as opposed to the 64-bit version. So click on here. And pick a mirror. It doesn't matter which one. Well, pick the one closest to you to be a good internet netizen. And then you'll see this huge list of options. Oh my goodness, there's so many things to choose from. But what we want is actually the net install. Now, minimal in this case is not the same as Ubuntu's minimal. Minimal means it'll install a complete system, just a very small system, without hitting the internet. We actually want the net install version that actually requires you to go on the network to do the install. So CentOS net install, notice it's not just called mini.iso. Thank you very much, CentOS. I appreciate that. But click on it. We're going to save that as well. And you see I've done this before, but we're going to actually use these and burn them to CD. Now I'll take a side note here real quick. I know that I said we're doing a network install, and why would we still be burning to CD? Hey, there are lots of other ways that we can start the install. And if that's something that you want me to explain, like how to make a USB installer or a PXE installer, those are the kind of things that in the user survey, hey, mention that, and maybe we can come back to doing some different types of install medias. But for right now, the simplest way is to get this ISO file and burn it onto a blank CD. It doesn't have to be a DVD, just a blank CD, and we'll go from there. So these are downloading, and I'm going to boot it up on my virtual machine as if I burned that mini.iso Ubuntu image and booted up a computer, and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, here we are on my virtual machine. You'll see I've booted up that ISO image, that mini.iso, and this is the Ubuntu net install image, or minimal installation CD. And basically this is pretty straightforward. It looks like you're installing any other CD, but we'll select install, hit enter, and it'll go through the process. Here we go. So far, if you've installed Ubuntu, this looks similar. I'm just going to select these really quick. How to install is actually part of the LPIC 1 series, so we're not going to explain exactly what's going on. This is the basic installation process. Nothing is different here than installing from a regular old CD. You'll notice it does automatically configure your network, so you're not going to be able to do a network install unless you have a properly working network. And here we are. It looks pretty standard. Now here is where it starts to get a little bit different. You'll notice up here on the top it says choose a mirror of the Ubuntu archive, and it says pick the country that you're in. I happen to be in the US, so I'll pick that by default. And what Ubuntu archive mirror do I want to choose? Well, it's automatically selected, us.archive.ubuntu.com. I'll say yes, that's the one I want to use. I don't need any sort of an HTTP proxy. If you do need a proxy on your network, this is where you would enter it using that format that it shows you right there. But I don't need anything, so just hit enter. And now it's going to go through the process of downloading the Ubuntu installation files off the internet. And here's the key. It's going to take a while because it's coming off of the internet, so I'm actually going to do some fancy editing. I'm not going to make you wait here while it's downloading all that stuff. The key is you're getting the absolute latest version directly off the internet, so it's not like you're installing a CD that's already months old. You're actually installing the very freshest bits right off the internet, and it'll save you a lot of updating time. So I'll twiddle my thumbs here while this goes, and once it comes up, I will edit it, so I'll give you an idea about how long it took. Okay, I've been waiting here for just about 2 minutes, and finally we got this screen where it's starting to load the basic installation files that it downloaded off the internet. So we're going to let this go because, again, it's going to take some time coming off the internet. Now it's going through the next process. It's going to ask us about time zone. This is, again, pretty normal, pretty part of the standard install like we would do with a normal CD. In fact, now that we've selected the mirror that we're going to use, it's going to go through a very, very similar process to a standard install up until the point where we have to tell it what exactly we want for it to install. Now we're going to go through the partitioning just like we normally would. I'm going to just accept the defaults. And now this is the part that takes quite a bit of time. It's installing the base system. Now this does not mean it's installing the entire system. This is just the stuff that no matter what you want in the end, whether you want a desktop or a server or Kubuntu or Xubuntu or Lubuntu or MediaBuntu or whatever flavor Ubuntu you want, the base system is going to have to be there. This is stuff like, well, you can see what it's installing as it goes along, but things like you're going to need a kernel, and you're going to need, basic core utils, and you're going to need, all of the standard things that are going to be in any version of Ubuntu. That's what it's installing now. After it's done here is when it asks us to specify what exactly we want. Now in just a second you're going to see something that happens in the real world. As we're going along, my internet connection here in my office goes offline. Bam! All of a sudden I'm unable to download the package from the internet to do the network install. My first instinct was, okay, we need to start over and record over, but then, hey, this is the real world series, and what you have to do is basically what we're doing here. You just continue along, restart the process, my internet connection came back up, and now we're reinstalling the base system right over top. Again, not something I planned, but I'm really glad it happened, because as you're doing things in the real world, invariably things like this are going to happen, and you need to know how to react. In this case, you just allow it to to start the process over, and things go really well. And from here, now the process is going along, and we can continue as if nothing bad happened. Okay, after all that, it's now like 20 minutes later. We've had one weird problem that happened and we dealt with and we moved on. Now we're to the point where we add a username. So I'll add my username, my account. I always use SPowers. No reason, but I do. My password, my luggage password, 12345. Don't really use that. But yes, I really want to use my weak password. This is something you should never do, but you know, I don't want to tell you what my real password is. I'm not going to encrypt my home directory. Again, this is just standard installation stuff. It's going to set up the mirror. Now remember, we've only installed the very base system. So there's really nothing here except the base system. And it normally doesn't take quite as long as it did this time. Again, we had those network errors going on. But what it's doing right now, it's retrieving all of the apt information for the package management system so that we'll be able to install things from here. And finally, we get the software selection screen. Now, this is the part where you decide what exactly sort of system you want to install. Now, if you go down here, you'll see there's there's the Ubuntu option. We can install Ubuntu. We can install Ubuntu with LXDE. For right now, I'm just going to go with the basic Ubuntu. So you just hit the space bar there. I also want OpenSSH installed, and let's say I want to have a LAMP server. Should be familiar with LAMP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP or Perl or whatever you want the P to stand for. But basically, this is just setting up a basic server. You have the basic Ubuntu server with SSH and Apache and such. All right, so you just select what you want, and then you click Continue. Now this is the part, again, this is going to take quite a while because what it's going to do is download the absolute latest updated versions of all the packages required to set up a basic Ubuntu server with the LAMP stack. So again, we'll speed through this part, assuming we don't have any other network errors. And at the end, we'll have a fully updated, ready-to-go server. Alright, I installed the MySQL server, or the LAMP stack, so now I need to decide what password I'm going to have for my MySQL server. Something safe. Not 12345. Something much more secure. And it'll continue on with the rest of the install. And just like with a regular install, it's going to ask us if we want to install grub on the master boot record, which I do. Alright, so our installation is complete. If we click continue, it's going to reboot into our fully installed, totally updated system. Now, beginning to end from the installation time, it took just about 35 minutes, which is a very long install. Granted, we did have some network problems, but even considering that, it's an awesome way to get a fully updated system, but at the same time, it's not the way that you want to install all the time, which leads us to the next step, and that's setting up a local mirror. Before we do that, let's look and see what the process looks like on CentOS. So I'm going to use this same machine, but instead of booting from that mini.iso file, I'm going to burn the CentOS network install ISO and boot the computer from that. So let's take a quick look at that. We won't go through the whole process because it's very similar, but we'll just take a look at it real quick. Okay, so I've booted up the net install CentOS 6.2 image that we downloaded earlier. I'm just going to click on install. Again, this looks a little bit different than the Ubuntu install, but the same kind of concept. It's just booting up a very stripped down kernel. Just going to walk through this pretty basic stuff. And here's where our options change a little bit. So what is it that we have? Do we have a local CD, a hard drive, NFS directory, or URL? So this means that we could put all the ISO files that we download into an NFS directory, or we could mount an NFS directory with the installation RPMs. I'm going to use a URL just because setting up a web server is the easiest way when we move on to the next step and set up a local mirror. So click OK. Yeah, we want to, actually, I don't have IP version 6 set up, so I'm going to disable that. And click OK. Now this part is not quite as friendly as the Ubuntu version. It doesn't auto-populate a mirror for you. So you can Google where a local CentOS 6 mirror is for you. I'm actually going to type the standard one here. mirror.centos.org/CentOS/6 OS. And remember, I'm using the 32-bit, so i386. Now, when we set up our local mirror next, we're going to use our own path here. But this is, if we're installing off the internet, this is what we're going to need. So, enter that and hit OK. You'll see it's already retrieving the stuff right off the internet, an installation image, so that we can go through the entire process. So from here on, it's different than Ubuntu, but only in that it's different to install CentOS than it is to install Ubuntu. The concept is the same here. We're installing from a mirror on the internet, and I'm going to speed through a bunch of this. If there's something different along the way that's significantly different, I'll let you know. But otherwise, this is just a standard CentOS install now. It's just off the internet instead of off a local DVD. And 100%, another, 15 minutes or so has gone by. Again, not the quickest way to install something, but we're at 100% now. And just like Ubuntu, in the end, it tells us that it's time to reboot. It's going to reboot into a new, freshly installed CentOS system, and although it took a long time to copy over the network, it's a really neat way to install stuff. And just like Ubuntu, here we have a fully installed CentOS system. Now again, this is a pretty stripped down install. It didn't install a full desktop and didn't give us the option. But this is something where now we can install the desktop system if we wanted to. Now unfortunately, it did take a long time. So let's look back and see what our next step in the nugget is. So back at our slide here, this is the beginner level stuff we talked about. We learned how to do network installs for both Ubuntu and CentOS. We even had a problem with Ubuntu along the way, which was kind of awesome. I'm glad that happened so we could learn, what it means, how to deal with it. Next, we're going to move on to making these network installs more efficient. I want to talk about a local mirror. Now, it's important to know that a local mirror for Ubuntu, if you do the entire repository, is going to be like 300 gigabytes. It's going to be significantly smaller for the CentOS mirror, but it's something that if you do this, granted 300 gigabytes isn't that much space anymore, but you need to know it's going to take a long time for that initial download. So let's go to the command line and we're going to look and see how that actually happens. Now to note, I'm actually using my live server in my office because I don't want to wait for 300 gigabytes to download. No offense, I mean I like hanging out with you guys, but that's a long time. So I'm going to show you my server as it sits with both an Ubuntu and a CentOS mirror, talk about how to do them, and then I'll show you a couple scripts as well that make it even easier. Okay, so here we are, and like I said, this is my actual server in my office, and I'm going to show you a couple things. First of all, let's look at my var www folder. Now in there, this is where Apache, this is where my web server is being served out of, is var www. And in there I have a couple things. I have an index.html so that it actually, if somebody just hits my server, they actually see a static web page. But let's look at ls-l so you can see what's actually here. So these are symbolic links to opt_mirror CentOS and opt_mirror Ubuntu. These are actual folders in my opt directory, which is like a 15 terabyte server. So there's lots and lots of room there, and that's where I actually do the backups. So while there's a symbolic link in var www, that's in that spot because that's where Apache serves my web pages out of. But I actually store the mirror in this opt directory because it's a really big partition. Alright, so it's actually stored here, but see, it's served out of here. We've learned about stuff like that back in the LPIC series if you went through that with me. But basically, I just wanted you to see how the folder structure is set up. And in order to create the mirrors, we're going to use a tool called rsync. Now there's a couple different ways you can make them. You can use debmirror, which is a neat tool for making an Ubuntu or a Debian mirror, but we're going to use rsync. It's very simple, it's very universal. You're going to find rsync everywhere, and it's a pretty simple way to go about making a complete mirror on your computer. The command is pretty simple. It's rsync, I'm going to say -a, archive, and the source of where we're going to sync from is rsync : archive.ubuntu.com Ubuntu, and then the place we're going to put it, remember this is on my server opt mirror Ubuntu. So this is the command that is going to actually create the mirror. So if I hit enter, it's going to go through the whole thing, give us a little bit of information. Hey, it has limited resources. Make sure you're using a local mirror. So to be politically correct, we would probably use the us.archive.ubuntu.com, and that would be a local mirror for me, or whatever your local country code is. Or you could pick a different mirror that's even closer to you, like if you're at a university, you could pick it, see if that college has a local mirror. And it's going to go through this rsync command. This is going to take hours and hours and hours. So I'm going to actually cancel this, Control C, to get out of this. But what it was doing is, in the background, it was creating a mirror. Now if you actually want to see process during this, you can add the process flag, or progress, I'm sorry, not process. So that -- progress means I want to see what's going on while you do it. And so now it's telling us it's receiving an incremental file list, and see, it's all of these files. So then we actually get to see it do its thing while it's going along. So it's downloading all of these files. Now this is a way that you can create a mirror, a one-time thing, just one command line code, and when it's done, you're going to have the Ubuntu mirror right there on your computer. Again, I'm going to cancel this. It's the same type of thing. Let me clear the screen. So we also have the CentOS mirror, and it's the same type of thing for mirroring CentOS. rsync -a. We'll do the progress thing again just so we can see what's happening. And the source that we're going to get it from is an rsync mirror. I'm actually going to be a good netizen, and I'm going to use one that's kind of local to me. Again, you can look this up on the CentOS website where local mirrors are. Alright, so I've done the same thing we did with the Ubuntu mirror, rsync, progress, source, destination, hit enter, and it's going to go through and see it's doing the same thing it did before. It's downloading all those files and putting it in our directory. It's actually going to do the entire CentOS repository, not just the version that we have, but it's going to download everything. Alright, I'm going to hit cancel again because that's going to take a long time. And basically, so what we have inside the CentOS folder here, we have the entire repository. Alright, so this is the entire repository with CentOS. We can do a network install. And the same thing with Ubuntu. We have the Ubuntu mirror. We have the Ubuntu mirror here. It actually, this is what it looks like. There's not version numbers here. If you really want to see those, you just go to dists and see. This is how Ubuntu's set up with all these different folders and stuff. So that is how you actually run the mirror. Now, honestly, if you just want to do a one-off thing one time on, rsync on the command line, or whenever you think about it to update, that's perfectly fine. I, like most good Linux sysadmins, have actually stolen from other people. And stolen's not really a good word, but there's a couple people that have written some very, very helpful scripts that do a much better job of keeping your mirrors up to date. I'll look at these really quick. The Ubuntu mirror sync script. This one is written by Peter Noble. Thank you so much, Peter. And basically, you can define a bunch of things. You can say where you want it to log. You want email sent. If when it completes, it'll send you an email, the subject line of the email. You can determine what mirror server you want to use. Again, something local is always recommended, so maybe us.archive.ubuntu.com. And where you want the local media to stored, like remember mine is opt mirror Ubuntu. And then there's other things. It does error checking, and it'll say, hey, it's already in progress, blah, 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 blah. It's just a much neater way of doing it. And then you can also do something like put these in your cron tab file. If that's something you want to learn about, let me know, and we'll cover that more in depth in a later nugget. But you can put this in a cron tab file, so every night it just automatically keeps you up to date. And the same thing with the CentOS mirror script. This is another one. This is actually by Georg, or George, I'm not sure how to say his name. But same kind of thing. It keeps the CentOS mirror updated, and you can run this from your cron job. It does a little bit better job of of error checking and making sure that you're not running two rsync scripts at the same time. That's just, again, my recommendation is to do that. What I will do, I'm going to put both of these files, I'll put them on the page where you watch the streaming video file that we're watching right now. So on the page there should be a link to download these two different files. So you can take them, modify them, play with them, do whatever you want to make them work for you. But once you've run the rsync thing, either with this script or just with the command line tools that we just saw, then you'll have, like me, these two folders inside your web server. And then is where the real magic happens. I'm not going to go through the whole process again, but I will start another network install just to show you how cool and how fast it is to use your own mirror. So let's go back to the virtual machine really quick just to take a look at how a network install would go. Alright, so remember back the Ubuntu network installer, remember that mini ISO that's so annoyingly named? Well, we're going to go through and start the install process really quickly. I just want to show you the difference when you set up your own repository or your own mirror when you tell it that. So this is all the same stuff that we've done before, keyboard layout, blah 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 blah. It's going to detect the hardware. It's going to start our network card because remember, network install. I'm going to just really quickly go through this. I'm not actually going to do the install. I just want to show you the part where you select your own mirror. Now in CentOS, you remember we had to type the name of the mirror, so that's pretty simple. You just type your address right in that line instead of the CentOS mirror that we used. But here in Ubuntu, since it automatically tries to tell where you are, see how it's telling us to choose a mirror, choose a country here? If you scroll all the way up, or hit page up to go quickly, there's an option there to enter information manually. So hit enter, and this is where you can enter your web server. So my web server, make sure it works here, 192.168.1.240 is the address of my server here in my office. Hit enter. Remember, it's that Ubuntu directory, opt_mirror/Ubuntu, or var www Ubuntu for that symbolic link. So that is the correct folder. So I hit enter. No proxy information. And you'll notice, bam, it went right out on the network, and it's very quickly, just over my local network now, getting the Ubuntu install information. So we're going to go from like, a half hour or 40 minutes of installation down to something extremely quick. And it's not terribly difficult to actually set up your local mirror. And after that initial rsync that will take forever and a day, like literally it might take a day depending on your bandwidth. After that, it doesn't take too much every night just to update and install your local file or the updates that have happened overnight. So if you do that cron job with your local mirrors updating, it goes really quick. And as you can see, installing from a local mirror, I mean, this isn't fast forwarded. This is real time. It's really getting those files that quickly. So that's how to set up a local mirror. The CentOS is extremely similar. You just enter the address, the 192.168 or whatever your server might be. You put that in the mirror field, and it's going to do that network install off your local network. It's a really, really great way to speed up network installs. And talking about speeding up network installs, let's go to the last part of this nugget where we learn how to automate the entire process. I don't know about you, but sometimes hitting enter, 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 next can get really annoying, especially if you need to install a bunch of servers. So let's go check out Kickstart files. It turns out that running a Kickstart install is pretty much exactly the same whether you're running CentOS or Ubuntu. Now, I prefer Ubuntu. That's just the way I am. I actually hate Unity, this new thing on the side, but that's a whole nother story. We'll talk about that some other time maybe. But I'm going to use Ubuntu as our operating system to demonstrate how a Kickstart file works. Now, Kickstart files are nothing more than a text file that contains a recipe for how you want the install to go. Now, there happens to be a really nice GUI tool that you can create a Kickstart file with, and we're going to install that right now. So using apt-get, sudo apt-get install, it's called system config kickstart. Hit enter. And it's going to install a couple dependencies. You'll notice we're using my local mirror here. And we did a network install. That's all nice and cool and fast. So it's going to install this. Alright, so basically we've installed it. Now let's start it. System config Kickstart. It's also in the menu if you can figure out the Ubuntu Unity menu thing, but I'm just going to type it on the command line, hit enter, and it's going to bring the Kickstart configurator up. Now, if you look, there's a whole bunch of options on the left-hand side. We'll start with basic configuration, and basically you go through and all of the options plus more that you have during the install, that's what you get to select here. So things like languages. I want to make sure that English United States is installed, so I'm going to check that. That's the correct time zone. Actually, I'm in the Eastern time zone, so that'll work. All of these look correct. Let's go to installation method. Now we're going to be performing a new installation. That's really the only option here. And we're going to choose, instead of using a CD-ROM, we're going to use an HTTP. Actually, just the server address, 192.168.1.240. Remember, the directory was Ubuntu. Remember, we did this during the network install. We're just filling in the information automatically. Bootloader options, install a new bootloader. We don't want to grub password, install it on the master boot record. If you want to put custom kernel parameters, you can. Clear the master boot record, remove all the partitions and initialize it. Now, again, this is some scary stuff, so be really, really, really careful here, because it's just going to automatically go through and wipe your drive if we set it up this way. And you go through and set everything else up. So add a network device, Ethernet 0 with DHCP. Yep, that's what we want. Authentication. Now, here's something to know. There are issues with LDAP. Hopefully, it's been solved in the most recent version. But just know that LDAP authentication, it doesn't work all that well with Ubuntu Kickstart. It actually does work fairly well with CentOS, but there's some issues with LDAP authentication with the Kickstart file here. So just be aware of that. Test it out. See if, I mean, there's other ways to do it. You can actually do a post-installation script that will write files. So you can create your LDAP configuration files by adding a script at the end. Kind of cool stuff. User configuration. Now this is something even though some people don't like it, I actually like to have the root account enabled. So put a password here. Type it twice, encrypt the root password. You can create a user like me. It'll encrypt my user password as well. Firewall configuration. You can disable it, you can enable it, you can do all these things. I mean, I don't have to go through every single option. You can configure the X Windows system and have known by default. You can start it so that, like, if it's a desktop system, or you can not start it. It's just really all the options that you can have during a thing. Now, this is the part that you can't configure within the GUI. It just doesn't work right. This is where you can select packages to install during the install process. Now, normally it would be nice if this GUI would work and you could just add something, but it doesn't. So, we're just going to have to deal with that. And it'll give us one more, like, oh, it doesn't work, so how do you fix it in the real world? Haha, we have another way to do that. So we're going to look at the configuration file here in just a second. But these are the things. You can actually put scripts that you want to run before. Like, say you want to do something like add a custom file, so you can, like, echo a bunch of lines into a file, like for configuring LDAP, if you want to do that beforehand. Same thing with after the installation. You can do something so that it will run, shell commands right on the command line as part of it. Whatever you want that to be, the sky's the limit here. These are just scripts that are going to run after the fact. That's why we're automating the entire process. All right, so you go through, you make sure everything is configured the way you want it. Then File, Save File, and we're going to save it just so we can see it on the desktop. ks.cfg is the default. We'll just save it as that. That works for me. All right, and then we close this. File, quit. Let's minimize this. And then you see, here's our file, ks.kfg. Now, if we double click on it, we can edit the text file just with the text editor. So it's going to open up just with gedit or whatever you're using on your computer. And you'll see all that GUI tool did, it didn't do anything other than make this text file. See, so all these things that we configured, you could have just done with the text editor. I mean, you could have typed all these things out by hand, and that would have been perfectly fine. But here you see some of the options that you have where you can you can modify these if you want. Initial user, this is my username, encrypted, password, blah, 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 blah. Reboot after install, all these things. You can modify these with a text file, and that's perfectly fine. All right, like say we don't really want 640 by 480 as a resolution. That's pretty tiny. You can change that here. It's really neat. I'm pretty much happy with everything we set up, except, do you remember I said, unfortunately, the GUI tool with Ubuntu, even with this latest version, it's very frustrating, doesn't allow you to select packages that you want to install. Well, that's where we're going to add something just at the end of the file. Again, comments, just like with a lot of scripts, the hash or the pound sign is a comment. So we're going to make a comment, so if we edit this later, we know what's going on. Let's say package information. All right. And so the next line, now there's two things you can do. If you put an @ and then something like Ubuntu Desktop, that's going to install the Ubuntu Desktop meta package. You can also just install individual packages. Like let's say it's going to be a desktop running Ubuntu Desktop, but I also want to have the Open SSH server package, and I really like Vim. I hate it when Vim is not installed by default, so I'm going to do that. And I'm also going to be mounting an NFS server, so I'm going to want the NFS client package installed. And there we have packages that are going to be installed during the installation process. You can put anything you want here, just one on each line. If it's a meta package like Ubuntu Desktop, just put that @ in front of it and it's going to install the entire thing. But this is our Kickstart file now. All the things that we've configured are all ready to go, and we've added the packages to install at the end. So we save this file, and we need to keep this file somewhere accessible. There's a bunch of ways you can store this Kickstart file. If you want to create a CD that has a Kickstart file on it, you just need to remaster the CD with the ks.cfg file on the CD along with the installation files. Also, it doesn't have to be named this. This is just the default. I usually leave it at that. But let's get our terminal back here. Go to the desktop. So here's our file. Actually, and that's the little tilde file that gedit keeps. But we just want that CFG file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to SCP secure copy using SSH ks.config, and I'm going to copy it to my server where I have my Ubuntu mirror and my CentOS mirror. So I'm going to copy it there so that it's available via web server. All right. So we're going to say root at, and remember where my web server is. It's var www, and that's where I want that ks.cfg file to be. So I'll hit enter. Yes. And okay, there we go. So now this file is on my web server. Now we didn't really ever look over at the web server, so let's take a look at the web server on my local network. And so here we see this is the Kickstart file that we created, now available over the web. See all these things we added at the end. Now this is really cool because now, since it's available on our network, when we do a network install, we can specify that Kickstart file and things will just go automatically from beginning to end. So let's restart this virtual machine. We're going to put that mini.iso file in there. So it's going to boot there, and we're going to specify on the command line that we want to use a Kickstart file. And then we'll just watch and learn. And that's going to be the end. But this is how you create the Kickstart file. You make it accessible either on the network or on the same CD, and then on the command line, when you start up the Linux installer, you specify that it's a Kickstart file. All right, so let's reboot this computer and check out what that looks like. So here we have the same Ubuntu network install screen that we've seen a couple times now. But you see in the bottom, it says press enter to boot or tab to edit a menu entry. Well, we're going to hit tab, and this is the default entry that if you just hit enter and do install, this is what's actually done. Linux is the boot option with all these different options at the end. We're going to add to the end of this, ks for Kickstart, equals, and then the location of where our Kickstart file is. Now it's not on the CD. For us, it's on the network, which means we can edit it and it's always available. I really like having the Kickstart files on the network. And basically our address is http://192.168.1.240/ks.cfg. If you remember that address, that's the one that, where we put the kickstart file. So basically the only thing we've changed is at the end of the kernel options here, we've added this ks for kickstart equals and then the location of that file. So we simply hit enter, and now it actually goes through the entire process without us touching a thing. We don't have to enter names. We don't have to tell it that we want to partition the hard drive. We don't even have to tell it that we want to install the Ubuntu desktop. It does everything from start to finish based on that kickstart file that we did. So you can see this is an incredible time saver. Now, I'm not going to make you sit through and watch the entire installation process again, because honestly there's nothing for us to do but just wait for it to be done. It's going to reboot when it's over, and then we have a fully installed system with username already installed or already entered, etc., etc. So that's a kickstart file. Now let's look back at our original slide, make sure we have everything covered, and then comes the exciting part, which we'll talk about next. Okay, we accomplished what we were hoping for. We covered network installs. We did that both on CentOS and Ubuntu. We talked about setting up local mirrors, and actually, like I said, I'm going to link to a couple of different sample scripts if you want to automate that on your server so that you don't have to just run that single command line rsync command. And then we just went over the advanced kickstart file type idea. Now that's a powerful way to automate installs and have them go even quicker. So this is our installation nugget, and here's what I want to do next. Now is where I give you the reins for this entire series. Now, we have an initial survey. There's a link on the same page that you're watching this streaming video right now, and I would like you to go and take that survey right now. Actually, you can wait about a minute or so while I finish talking about it. But go take this survey, because what you answer on the survey is what we're going to base the rest of the series on. Maybe this installation nugget wasn't exactly what you're hoping for. You wanted to hear more. You wanted to learn about how to install via PXE boot, so there's no ISO files and no CDs at all. Maybe that's what you want to know. If so, hey, fill out the survey. Let me know. But what you fill out on this initial survey, this is what's going to set the outline for the whole rest of the series. It's very important. I urge you to go fill that out because you're in control right now. And then as we go along, once that initial survey comes back and I get the outline going and we get headed down the nugget trail. The nugget trail? Is that a thing? Anyway, there's going to be a continuing feedback survey. And every time I have a nugget, I hope that you will go there and give feedback for that nugget. Let me know if there's more things I should cover, if there's more things in depth, or if it made you think of something. Maybe we're talking about how to set up a virtual host in Apache, and that reminded you that you'd like to install KDE. I don't know why it would remind you of that, but something like that. Say, hey, Sean, while you were doing that, it reminded me I'd really like to know how to blank. Tell me what that blank is, and hopefully we can fit it in a later nugget. So it's going to be a really exciting series. I really hope that you'll participate, because the more you participate, the better it's going to be for everybody involved trying to learn about Linux in the real world. I hope that this nugget has been informative for you, and I would like to thank you for viewing.